Zimbabwe President Emmerson Mnangagwa has again called for the removal of what he calls illegal sanctions on his country. The U.S. imposed sanctions in 2001 under the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act. The sanction follows Zimbabwe's controversial land reform program in 2000 and the subsequent government-sponsored violence on democratic practices and human rights abuses. Speaking Thursday to the 77th session of the UN General Assembly in New York, President Mnangagwa touted his government's support for sustainable development, but he said the sanctions continue to slow down Zimbabwe's development.
Mr. President, as my government continues to entrench democracy, good governance and the rule of law, we are committed to vibrant, competitive and peaceful political contestations. Notwithstanding our success, the ongoing deleterious effects of the illegal sanctions continue to hamper and slow down our progress and the realization of sustainable and inclusive development. Zimbabwe is a peace-loving country. We remain indebted to the SADC region and African Union, as well as other progressive members in the Committee of Nations, for their unwavering support and calls for the removal of these unwarranted and unjustified sanctions on Zimbabwe. We once again call for their immediate and unconditional removal. My country welcomes the findings of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the negative impact of the unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights who visited Zimbabwe in 2021. Mr. President, at the international level, Zimbabwe has adopted an engagement and re-engagement policy. The policy is underpinned by the principles of mutual understanding and respect, cooperation, partnership, and shared values with other members of the international community. We desire to be a friend to all and an enemy to none. The spread of terrorism and intensification of all the conflicts on the African continent and throughout the world have been a setback to our quest to silence the guns. In Southern Africa, we remain seized with insecurity and terrorist insurgency in northern parts of Cabo Delgado in Mozambique and the conflicts in parts of the Great Lakes region. Emboldened by our SADC regional philosophy that an injury to one is an injury to all, we continue to pool our resources to fight terrorism and other threats to peace, security, and stability in our region. We appeal to the United Nations to render the requisite support to our efforts to restore peace in the affected areas.
That was Zimbabwe President Emmerson Mnangagwa speaking Thursday at the ongoing 77th United Nations General Assembly in New York. Liberian President George Weah says his government supports constitutional rule in West Africa as Liberia prepares for presidential and parliamentary elections in 2023. Weah told the 77th United Nations General Assembly on Thursday that democracy in Liberia was growing step by step. However, he cautioned prospective politicians to avoid incitement of violence and other behavior that he said could deprive Liberians of the peaceful space they need to freely choose their next leaders. President Weah's speech comes as it appears a propaganda campaign aimed at Liberian voters has broken out over the past few weeks. Weah says his government is committed to creating an enabling environment for a free, fair, transparent, and inclusive election.
After many years of civil upheaval, Liberia is becoming a stronghold for peace and a safe haven for democracy. This is because we have taken actions in the last few years to build and strengthen democratic institutions such as the press and the Liberian judiciary. We have put forward new legislation that empower the media while eradicating those that have tended to suppress free speech. I am proud to say that from the beginning of my administration to date, there is no political prisoner in Liberia. Our regional conferences of the Mana River Union and the ECOWAS, which have been called to discuss efforts to restore democracy in the few troubled spots in our West African region, Liberia has constantly and consistently pleaded for a strict adherence to constitutional terms limits and for a return to democratic civilian rule in cases of military takeover. Liberia is expected to hold presidential and legislative elections in October 2023. The forthcoming election will be crucial to consolidating our democracy. In this regard, I wish to underscore my government's unwavering commitment to ensuring that the enabling environment continues to exist for the conduct of peaceful, free, fair, transparent, and inclusive elections. This is in keeping with my commitment to ensure that the democratic will of the Liberian people is respected at all times. In the run-up to the 2023 elections, it is incumbent upon all prospective candidates to avoid the incitement of violence and any other behavior that could deprive the Liberian people of the peaceful space that they need to freely exercise their franchise and freely express their political will in choosing their leaders. We must let the people decide, and then we must respect their decision. This is indeed the true essence of democracy.
That was Liberian President George Weah speaking Thursday at the United Nations General Assembly. In his speech to the United Nations General Assembly earlier this week, U.S. President Joe Biden expressed support for expanding the Security Council by granting permanent seats to Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa. Some say the Council's new members should not have veto powers. Is this fair? VOA's Carol Van Dam posed this question to Ken Opalo, assistant professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and author of the book Legislative Development in Africa, Politics and Post-Colonial Legacies.
No, because it would defeat the purpose of expanding the Security Council to begin with. I think the clamor for membership in the Council reflects a desire to get rid of this post-World War II settlement where in the UN some countries are more equal than others. And so having a two-tier permanent membership would defeat that purpose. If the Security Council is to be expanded, it should be expanded with full powers for all the new members.
Do you think that African countries would be receptive to it even if they have that restraint on them?
I don't think so. I think maybe they would accept it as a first step, but the agitation has always been clear that African countries want a full seat at the table, not a half measure like, membership without veto powers.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about this idea of a Russian oil price cap. The U.S. and its European and Asian allies are talking about sanctions on Russia and energy prices as they figure out how to ramp up punishments on Moscow at UNGA. Finance ministers from the Group of Seven formally support the idea of a price cap on buying Russian oil, and because it's aimed at cutting Russia's revenue from oil that is used to fund the war in Ukraine. Will African countries abide by a price cap, do you think?
The simple answer is that African countries are likely to be divided on this question. Some will, some won't. So far, only South Africa has come out being clear that they will not follow every step, the U.S. on every step along this path. But, presumably if Russia is offering African countries petroleum products at a cheaper price than what they're currently paying for, they would take that price even if it violates the price cap set by the U.S. and its partners. or they will buy Russian oil that's been laundered through refineries in India and elsewhere, which may be cheaper than what's the going rate on the international market.
And you think that India and other countries would actually do that?
Yeah, I mean, so India and China are currently buying a lot of Russian oil. India in particular has ramped up its consumption of Russian oil. And so the practicalities of the sanctions will be difficult to implement, to put it mildly, right? It's difficult for the US to keep track of every drop of oil. And I think African countries, like other countries on the global stage, will want to get cheaper oil, in part because the current crisis is really affecting their bottom line. Many are oil importers, and anything that lowers their import bill would be very much welcome.
That was Ken Opalo, assistant professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development. He was speaking with my colleague, Carol Van Dam. To Daybreak Africa on the Voice of America. I'm James Botte in Washington. Today is Friday, September 23rd. And still to come on our program, Samson Omale Sports. Zimbabwe has approved a proposal by Chinese investors to build a nearly $3 billion industrial park for processing metals used to make batteries. Zimbabwean authorities say the lithium, platinum, and nickel production is part of efforts to refloat the sinking economy. But critics note that Zimbabwe has announced several multi-billion-dollar projects in recent years that failed to benefit locals. Columbus Mavunga reports from Harare.
Hip, hip!
There was a festive mood with music, food, and decorations at the Zimbabwe State House as Chinese investors last Friday signed a deal to build a $2.8 billion battery metals park. Zimbabwean authorities say the lithium, platinum, and nickel production will be used to make solar batteries. President Emerson Mnangagwa says the project, about an hour's drive northwest of Harare, will help turn around the decline of Zimbabwe's economy.
The Mines to Energy Industrial Park will augment my government's thrust on value addition and beneficiation of minerals, as well as bolster the crucial role that mineral value chains play in the national industrialization agenda. It is said to mark the inception of a lithium-ion battery value chain in Zimbabwe. It is said to place Zimbabwe amongst the world producers of lithium-ion batteries.
Zimbabwe's government plans to provide the land and minerals for the park, while the two Chinese companies investing will bring in machinery and needed funds. Mnangagwa is aiming for a $12 billion mining industry in Zimbabwe by next year. Lino Mhlanga is a director at Hong Kong Eagle International Holdings, one of the Chinese investors.
The project will revolutionize the mining and energy sectors of Zimbabwe, ensuring optimum value addition for all minerals extracted locally. Zimbabwe, Your Excellency, is endowed with most, if not all, of the minerals needed in this new clean energy drive. Kenyan Investments Holdings and Pacific Gold Investments are partnering with the government of Zimbabwe to set up this world-class energy industrial park. This multi-billion-dollar project, on completion, will have an annual turnover exceeding $13 billion. annually.
But critics note Zimbabwe has announced several multi-billion-dollar projects in recent years that fell apart, including by Russian investors for platinum and Chinese for diamonds. The projects that do go forward rarely benefit ordinary Zimbabweans, says opposition lawmaker and rights activist Daniel Molokelo.
The mining investment model that we have, which favors countries such as China, is a big disadvantage for the poor people of Zimbabwe, because the investment method is called extractive mining, is to the advantage of the investor than of the local communities. So Zimbabwe is not benefiting, at least at a common citizen level, unless and until we come up with a mining model that favors the local communities, that allows for shareholding and profiting for local communities in all mining investments.
Zimbabwe is home to valuable minerals such as gold, iron, diamonds, lithium, platinum, and chrome. But the World Bank says half of Zimbabweans live on less than $1 a day. Farai Maguhu is the director of the Center for Natural Resource Governance, a group working to improve governance of Zimbabwe's natural resources. He says the Metals Park deal needs to be transparent and aimed at helping locals, or else Zimbabwe will remain a resource-cursed country.
If government is only looking at creating jobs, then that's very minimal expectation that we can have out of this project. What is we see with the Chinese in Zimbabwe is that everything they are getting, they are taking it to China. That's why the influx of Chinese investors in Zimbabwe is not contributing anything even to liquidity in our financial sector, simply because the Zimbabweans are not involved in these projects.
The Battery Metals Park is expected to be up to 50 square kilometers in size when completed in about 3 years. Columbus Mavungam for VOA News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
New figures from Kenya's National Bureau of Statistics show the United States has overtaken Uganda as the largest buyer of Kenyan goods. Victoria Amunga reports from Nairobi.
The numbers from Kenya's National Bureau of Statistics show that between January and June 2022, Kenya's exports to the United States totaled 38.8 billion Kenya shillings, an equivalent of about $321 million. Uganda's imports from Kenya dipped to about $300 million. According to the report, the jump was caused mainly by increased sales of Kenyan clothing apparel to the U.S. Economists such as Ken Gichinga say the figures are a sign of Kenya's deepening bilateral relationships with the U.S., including increased direct flights to New York.
Americans have a bigger purchasing power for products in Kenya. So you'll find American investors will find it a very good time to be able to purchase assets and purchase things in Kenya because the markets are right now in their favor.
Uganda has been the biggest buyer of Kenyan exports for over a decade, but a Kenyan publication, Business Daily, reports that Uganda's imports from Kenya have dropped as investors set up Ugandan factories to manufacture goods previously imported from Kenya, such as edible oils and cement. Wangari Muikia, an economist in Kenya, says the country's strong relations with the U.S., backed by the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, will likely continue to thrive as the new government of President William Ruto is keen on more partnerships with America. Victoria Amunga for VOA News, Nairobi.
A Senegalese fishermen's collective is suing the owners of a fish meal factory, which they say has polluted their village and destroyed their livelihoods. The lawsuit is the first of its kind and could set a precedent for other communities fighting against fish factories. Annika Hamishlo reports from Thiers, Senegal.
Some 40 people assembled outside the courthouse in Thiès, Senegal on Thursday, chanting protest slogans and holding banners that called for the closure of the factory in the town of Kayar. The event marked what they had hoped would be the first day of legal proceedings between the Tuba Protein Marine Fish Meal Factory and the Fishermen's Taksawu Kayar Collective. However, the case was postponed to October 6th. LAC is a member of the Fishermen's Collective. He says that for anyone who comes to Kayar, all they'd have to do is breathe to understand the difficulties they're facing. People have fallen ill, seriously ill. Life is too hard now, he says, but we know we won't be alone in this fight. The factory has also significantly decreased the value of their land, he added. The Tuba Protein Marine Factory, formerly known as Barna Senegal, is one of at least a half-dozen fish meal factories that operate in the West African country. Fish meal is dried ground-up fish that is used as fertilizer or animal feed. According to the environmental group Greenpeace, the Tuba factory has dumped increasing and illegal levels of heavy metals into Kayar's land and water. Critics say fish meal factories have contributed to rising food insecurity throughout the region. They say the factories take fish that would otherwise be consumed locally and export them as fish meal to European and Asian markets, where it's used to feed farm animals. But Talagai, the communications officer for the Tuba factory, says the factory was established at a time when there was a surplus of fish being left on the beach. He also refuted claims that the factory had polluted Kayar's water. He says the director and many of the workers live next to the factory, and no one has been diagnosed with illnesses due to its impacts. Annika Hammerschlag for VOA News, Chess, Senegal.
It is time now for Daybreak Africa Sports, and here is Samson Omale in Abuja, Nigeria. A very good Friday morning to you, Samson.
Good Friday morning to you too, James. We begin the sport with the African Nations Cup Chan Algeria 2022 final draw. The draw, scheduled for Algiers, the Algerian capital, will be conducted on Saturday, the 1st of October.